So I do want to welcome you. I'm going to give you, after this administrative piece, just 5 or 10 minutes trying to set the context on the overall online mediation and online mediation training initiative. But I do first want to, and let me introduce myself. I'm Jim Malamed, and I was one of the co-founders of Mediate.com. And I was CEO of Mediate.com for 25 years until I got smart and hired Claire and Colin to run the show. And they've been doing an amazing job. And so I wanted to introduce Claire and Colin, who are handling the technical pieces other than my mess ups here. And specifically, Colin, I'm hoping you'll speak to the translation. Claire, anything about recording, chat, other issues that you guys want to speak to?
Sure, I'll do translation first. Welcome, everyone. Delighted to have you here. Due to the kindness of some of our task force participants, we have real-time translation today into Portuguese and to Spanish. If you'd like to listen to one of those other audio tracks, you can select the interpretation or a translation icon at the bottom of your Zoom, and you can select which language you'd prefer. So you can select English, Spanish, or Portuguese, and then you'll hear the presentation in that language. So please let me know in the chat if you have any technical issues.
And I just want to point out, you might not be able to see that right now while we're screen sharing. I'm not seeing it. I noticed that I had to set it up when we were back on the main screen. So if anybody isn't seeing it, as soon as we stop sharing, you'll notice that translation button show up again. Unless it's there and I'm just missing it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Colin, is it accurate that only the English version is actually recorded?
That is accurate. Yeah, when we record, we're only capturing the default language. So we won't be capturing the Spanish and Portuguese translations, unfortunately.
We may want to think in the future whether there's any workarounds on that, not necessarily with Zoom, but somehow other are recording it.
Sure. As
well as possibly a transcript. So we're just going step by step here. Thank you. And Colin, if people have translation concerns, what's the best way to contact you? Should they do a direct chat to you?
I think that's the best way to do it. In the chat, I'll be here the whole time. You can just send me a private message and then we'll try and work it out.
Okay. Great. And Claire, what else do we need to know?
So if anyone is, I'm assuming at this point, we're all way too familiar with Zoom, but just to go over a couple pieces, you'll notice that you have your mute and your stop video. For the most part, we're going to keep people muted again, just because this is going to be recorded. But we're hoping to do a couple times where we can have discussions. So I hope for those times you'll be able to unmute yourself and you can join in the conversation. If you have a question, please submit that in chat, and we're all monitoring chat, so we'll make sure to get your question in at the appropriate time. Other than that, I think we're good. If anyone has a question and they're not, if for some reason things aren't working on Zoom, I want you to notice my email address right there, the cfowler@mediate.com. That's just underneath my name. So please feel free to jot that down, and you can send me an email if something isn't working, and we can discuss it over email and make sure that we can get you back into the Zoom room. So I think that's it for me.
Good. And boy, some of these new features are just phenomenal for training and conferences and the like. And among them is that chat function. It's almost like there's a whole additional parallel conference taking place where people can ask questions and discuss and have commentary. And as things percolate and we really get some meaningful issues raised, we'll be bringing those into the main forum as well. And recording, oh my God, what a convenience now. You just push a button. And translation, wow. So really amazing new tools for us. Claire, if you'd be so kind to go to the next slide. I'm just letting you know how good looking our panel today is. And I'm going to again be doing a little contextual introduction here, but this is what we have to look forward to. in just about 10 minutes. Next slide, please. All right, so the everything from my perspective, at least, for the world of mediation changed in March 2020. And we're kind of a clearinghouse for mediation energy. And we were seeing people canceling conference attendance. We were having people call up and say, how do you do online mediation? Can you do that? What am I supposed to do about my training and the like? And essentially put, I believe, everything changed for the world of mediation and for many professional services in March. We couldn't fully realize it in the moment, but literally everything was changing overnight. In the US and progressively in every other country, seemingly, the only mediation taking place on planet Earth was, and I believe generally still is today, online. So for me, at this point, online mediation is mediation, and I think will forever be. And not only that, but the only mediation training that has come to be taking place is also online. And so it seemed to me that this was just a massive opportunity for us to do everything we could to elevate, if not perfect, mediation service and training offerings online. I've also come to the conclusion that whether people meet face-to-face or not, every case is still an online case. It's how they found you. It's how you communicate. It's how you get resources to them or drafts or the like. And that, even if you're going to have the luxury of meeting face to face, don't you also want to do everything online as capably as that can be done in support of the overall mediation efforts? And then, just to continue to have the brain explode here, I realize this is not just a North American phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon that's taking place. And not only that, but through communicating for family purposes, for workplace purposes, for all social purposes, we've all kind of gone through mass training. In North America, perhaps Zoom has been the dominant platform. I know other platforms dominate in other parts of the world. But the reality is that just through our everyday life, we've elevated our internet use from email and attachments and web pages to now also be able to, other than yours truly, capably meet on Zoom. Okay, so there's been these mass training events, not only of professionals, but of consumers, of participants. And that's not to say it's been uniform and that there aren't gaps and inadequacies, but as a whole, the world has shifted to be able to meet online. In fact, the meaning of the word meeting has changed. The meaning of the word background has changed. Lots of things have changed. But along with all this change, I want us to appreciate that all of this has taken place. The pandemic took place on top of 35 years of incremental online development. And I know it well. John Healy and I used to sell email addresses back in 1987 and 88, and everybody thought we were crazy. All right. And that's where it started. And people gradually moved online with directory listings and web pages and scheduling and getting paid and pretty much every other thing, contact forms, you name it. And all of that development was in place when the pandemic hit. So the pre-mediation internet communications and the, if you will, post face-to-face meeting online infrastructure were really in place. We were actively using the internet, almost all of us, to be found, to distribute information, to communicate, etc. And when the pandemic hit, we actually had a pretty good answer, which was to have Zoom or its analog rich media platform serve as a surrogate for the traditional face-to-face meeting. And while it was kind of different and we all struggle, with the technology initially, we realized, wow. And in fact, this is the holy grail that John Healy and I used to speak about 30 years ago when we talked about, would it ever get so smooth and convenient that being online would almost be like being there? And guess what? That's exactly where we're at. It's not quite as good. We can share a snack or the like. We don't have quite the same acuity and the like, but it's literally a miracle. It's a miracle. I mean, can you imagine if we went through the pandemic without the internet and without these abilities for rich media communications that somehow are almost free? I mean, it just blows me away. So I just want to honor that there was 35 years of incremental development that allowed us with the pandemic to jump on the Zoom machine or its analogs, rich media platforms, and we've learned to use them better over time. That's not what this forum is about. That's what the next forum is about. But clearly, we were able to respond. And now a couple of the big questions for me are, how do we dovetail all of this online development, the online services, the online training, with the established field of mediation, who generated their standards and for training, for ethics, you name it, without thinking about the online environment? And also for today's purposes, how does all this online development dovetail with our best efforts at global mediation development? That's our particular focus today. Claire, if you wouldn't mind the next slide. So a couple of the really specific questions, I don't know that we answer them today, but I believe with online mediation now being the new norm, that there in fact is, if you will, a new curriculum that needs to be discovered and developed, that in fact all mediators would reasonably need to be informed by, to most capably mediate online, but if you would, most capably mediate, I think, in these days. And secondly, how do we best train all mediators? Because all of the historic approaches didn't think about the internet being there. But I think even if for mediators who are doing nothing but face-to-face practice, why would they not also take advantage of the internet for all possible practice development? And there are certain unique abilities on the internet, just as an example, the ability to put people in breakouts and record those and give them personalized feedback. Recording and feedback used to be a major pain in the butt. You'd have to schlep the cameras and shoot it and post. Now it's a push of the button. And what about mentorship and consultation and observation? All of these things now are remarkably possible, whether you're an online mediator or a face-to-face mediator. All right, Claire, next slide. So the task force website, I've given you the URL there. In fact, Claire, if you would be so kind, because you found the PDF, would you mind putting the PDF in the chat, just the URL for this one, the forum intro 4.pdf up there. And so we've got a website for this online training task force that's trying to consider all of these issues. Woody Mostyn graciously and effectively has served as chair of the task force. This is the one forum that he was not able to make, but he will be at all of the other forums and correct all of my misstatements at that next forum. You'll also see the members of the executive committee, and if you get that PDF link, you can actually click on all the names and get backgrounds on them. you'll see, for example, that Tara and Colin and Claire are on the executive committee, Donna, others as well. Let's go to the next slide, if you'd be so kind. We've got a 28-member advisory board that we also seek feedback from and that participate on many of our committees. So you can see many folks there. You can click on their names, get background information. If you go to the next slide, please, Claire. We got 12 committees that are kind of looking at different facets of all of this online development. And ultimately, the goal is to come up with a report. And we've given ourselves July as a target date for getting that report out. And it would be a report on what we understand is happening out there, and to the extent that we make effective practice recommendations, we're going to do that. And we know that this is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning of the discussion, but we're wanting to get it going because we think it's critical that it takes place and that it takes place now. If you'd please go to the next slide. We do have 5 total forums. You can see the next one specifically on online mediation, what works, what are the new issues, what about online mediation training, what are the new opportunities, how do you screw up, how do you do a great job, and get some of these discussions and the sharing of the information going. And then we're going to move into a session on standards, ethics, and new technologies, and you can read the other 2 as well. So final slide, we're back to our amazing looking, and not only looking, but these are people with real depth and capacity. And I believe, Tara, that I get the privilege of handing the forum off to you. And thank you so much for your efforts, and Bruce for coordinating this panel, as well as to the others as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's forum on global growth of mediation. My name is Tara Ollapally. I am the co-founder of Camp Arbitration and Mediation Practice, which is a private mediation institution in India. And I have been privileged to be part of the mediation movement in India since 2015, where I've witnessed the growth of this movement from being quite unknown, more about how unknown it was a little bit later, to actually today, earlier today, I was listening to our law minister speak strongly about the need for mediation in our context. Our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court judges are also affirming of the fact that this is a process that needs to be developed in order to be able to find true justice and address the access to justice needs that our country faces. I also have the privilege of being the chair to this committee on global growth of mediation convened by Mediate.com, and have had a fantastic group of committee members to work with. Specifically, we've had Ken Cloak, Bruce Edwards, Moronike Obifarinde, Alberto Elisavetsky, and Laura Traum, who've been part of our committee. And early on, as we built our committee, we decided to focus our efforts to try and understand what are the typical challenges that a new mediation movement faces? What does it take to build a mediation movement? And focusing on the expertise of our committee from Nigeria, Argentina, Russia, and India, we have used these 4 countries who all have relatively newer mediation movements, 10 to 15 years of active work in the mediation space, to document the challenges that these newer mediation movements have faced and what are the strategies that they have used to try and overcome these challenges. And through this, to be able to identify what are the common challenges that new mediation movements could face, what are challenges that are unique to specific cultures. And our objective and hope is that come July, we will be able to contribute to this report that Jim was talking about through a blueprint that could serve as a resource for new mediation movements to be able to use as more and more communities, more and more countries engage in building mediation movements. So to our discussion, we framed a couple of questions as a committee to engage with as we researched our own jurisdictional mediation movement. Bruce Edwards will help each of us kind of think through and share our understandings further in this committee. In this discussion. But let me also quickly introduce our panelists before I hand over to Bruce, who will be moderating our discussion. So first we have Morenike Obiferinde, who is the managing partner of a law firm in Nigeria, where she focuses on corporate and commercial litigation, as well as building an ADR practice with a focus on mediation and arbitration. She has been closely involved with the Lagos multi-door courthouse, which, as we will hear further, has been a strong influencer in building an ADR culture in Nigeria. Morenike is also the founder of ODR Africa and has been one of the pioneers of online mediation in Nigeria. We also have Dr. Alberto Elisavetsky. I hope Alberto has been able to join us at this time. But Alberto is a pioneer in the field of ODR in Latin America, especially with respect to the use of technology to resolve social disputes. He is the founder and president of ODR Latin America. He teaches widely on this subject in the universities in Latin America, as well as in Italy and Spain. Alberto is a fellow at the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution and a board member at the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. A fun fact about Alberto is that he is an avid golfer who, when there was a world pre-pandemic, used to travel around the world to play golf. We also have Lara, who is a bilingual Russian-American attorney and mediator whose primary practice is in Queens, New York. Lara focuses on matrimonial and estate mediation and frequently assists Russian-speaking families with local and international issues that face their families. So Lara will be bringing us the perspective of what the mediation movement in Russia has been to this conversation. A fun fact about Lara, which as a matter of fact is a very accomplished fun fact, is that she's a professional classical singer who has performed at the Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. So a diverse group of people we have together today with diverse interests. Finally, we have Bruce Edwards, who really does not need any introduction, who's going to be moderating our panel. In addition to being a mediator par excellence and founding partner of JAMS, Bruce has been in the field of online mediation training well before 2020. Along with his wife, Susan, he co-founded the Edwards Mediation Academy, which is an institution that offers real-world interactive online courses taught by global experts in mediation. EMA offers a range of courses from basic mediation training to advanced mediation training, advocacy in mediation, building a career in mediation. And Bruce and Susan have been able to successfully take high quality online mediation education to over 900 students from over 20 different countries across the globe. Truly a path-making initiative when it comes to mediation training, especially in these times. And a fun fact, I must admit that I had a competitive advantage over here because Susan is a dear friend of mine as well, and she shares that Bruce is a brilliant mediator up until the time it comes to playing ping pong with his wife, which is when he becomes ultra super competitive. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Bruce, who will be moderating our panel as well as offering the perspective that he has gained in dealing with so many countries across the globe in supporting them in building their mediation culture. So over to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Tara, for the kind introduction and the unnecessary peek behind the family curtain. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And thank you, Jim and Colin and Claire, for all your work in pulling together this forum on global growth of mediation. We've got an exciting panel and an equally exciting opportunity, I think, to look through a broader lens today at some of the questions that Jim and Tara have so eloquently raised. So let's get to the panel conversation initially. And I think it's always a truism that to better understand where we're headed, it's important to understand where we've been. And I'd like to invite my panel to address the question of how has mediation been introduced within your own country, recognizing that that's almost an impossible question to answer in a finite amount of time, but we're going to try that almost impossible task. And Tara, I'm going to start with you because, as you point out, since 2015, you've had the privilege of being at the forefront of the developing mediation world in your country, India. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Thank you, Bruce. So just to give you all a quick idea about India, India has been dealing with a serious docket explosion crisis. Today we have about 40 million cases that are pending in our courts. The average time to resolve a dispute in our Indian courts is about 12 years. The cost, the economic cost of this overwhelmed justice system is about 2% of our GDP. So, and this has been a problem that has been plaguing India for many years. And our parliament in the late 90s amended our civil procedure code to insert section 89, which basically empowered the courts, empowered the judges to be able to refer a case to an ADR method if the judge saw that there existed an element of settlement that was acceptable to the parties. But although it was there in our statute books, it was only in 2005 when our Supreme Court actually intervened, and they passed a landmark judgment that took a strong pro-mediation stance, which led to the framing of model rules and the creation of court-annexed mediation programs. So the Supreme Court has consistently set up committees called the Mediation and Conciliation Project Committees to oversee the development of court-annexed mediation programs. Today, we have about 39,000 mediation centers across the country. Most of these are annexed to a court at the various levels. But over the past 5 years specifically, we have also seen the slow development of private mediation, where institutions like our institution are able to encourage the growth of mediation as a profession, introduction of mediation on a pre-litigation basis. And with this, the word mediation is becoming more and more acceptable in our culture. One of our largest historic political, economic, communal political issues, communal issues called the Ayodhya dispute, which kind of plagued our country as a whole for many, many years, was actually referred to mediation. So we're seeing the active involvement of the courts to push mediation and the slow involvement of, but sure involvement of the private organizations to enter the mediation space and bring in a culture of mediation.
Tara, a quick question. Having been to your beautiful city of Bangalore and viewed firsthand the community mediation centers, what role have community mediation centers played in the development of mediation throughout India?
a very important role in being able to create the foundation for a mediation culture. So although they are closely linked to the courts, and most of the cases that have gone to the community mediation centers, actually, it's not a community mediation center as much as a court annexed mediation center, because these are programs that are directly connected with the courts. Most of the cases that go to the court annexed mediation programs have been matrimonial disputes. So as we will discuss a little bit later, that has been one of the challenges that we have faced in the perception of mediation being largely, or rather primarily, for matrimonial disputes. But these programs have set the foundation for a mediation movement in our country.
Thank you for kind of setting that framework for discussion. I took a virtual walk down the hallway to see if we'd been joined by Alberto. I don't want to overlook him if he did join. Have we seen him today? Okay, we'll join him in progress if he's able to arrive soon. Laura, can you continue the conversation in terms of the historical perspective on the development of mediation in Russia?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So to understand the history of mediation in Russia, there are kind of two prongs. One is the government logistics that it takes for something to move forward as a conceptual process, and then the public perception. And those prongs are often in significant conflict, and that is how the history of mediation has evolved in a rocky way in Russia. So mediation as a process style, kind of behind closed doors, has always been part of traditional informal culture. However, in Russia, unlike in the US, it's a system of codes. So you don't have, case law, you don't have kind of common precedent that is looked to by judges. You need legislation in order for judges to be able to formally refer. So in about 2006, there was a kind of working draft of legislation, which is probably similar to what we would all want a nation to pass and advocate for, that was put forth and presented to the federal government. It was not passed right away. It was passed in 2011 with significant revision, a lot of murky vocabulary, and only kind of voluntary permission in civil contexts. So in 2011, this mediation law came into play. It permitted judges, and many judges were, as Tara explained in India, the dockets were overloaded and judges were theoretically thrilled by the concept of another approach, and were empowered by this law to start referring. The truth is that the referral process now, even in the judges that are among judges who are major advocates of mediation, is still under about 1% of the cases with the judges that are for it, right? So I think that gives a little bit of a sense. The movement in its current iteration has seen, the birth of a number of mediation centers. Those mediation centers are primarily focused on a little bit of legislative advocacy and some training. They don't tend to carry caseloads. So that's something to sort of understand about how it works in the Russian sector. But additionally, the movement has not really expanded into public awareness. So as much as there are some legal structures in place that now permit judicial referral, that does not mean that there is more public awareness. So that's just something to know the status quo where we are. The historical context to also consider is that as soon as something becomes formal in the Russian government and can formally be put forth and endorsed, the population becomes skeptical. That's the tension that's of typical interplay. So you need the codes for mediation to be part of the system, and then you start to wonder whether it's appropriate as a citizen of that system. So that's just kind of the historical backdrop. I will drop a quick note for ODR specifically, that in 2017, the federal government undertook new kind of formal laws about the online economy and regulation of online economy. And there's a perspective that ODR has an opportunity to blossom in relation to that. But again, it's theoretical at this juncture.
Thank you, Laura. And we'll come back and talk more about ODR shortly. You've anticipated one of my questions, which is, as I travel and to different countries, obviously different systems of government throughout the world, for those countries that have a more centralized form of government, some might call a strong form of government, it seems like it presents both an opportunity and perhaps a challenge. The opportunity, of course, being they can more readily push toward mediation, the challenge being potentially the trust issue that you've identified. How has that played out in Russia from your perspective in addressing that issue?
So I would say that in Russia, it plays out in the realm of clunky administration. So for example, the 2011 law does not have even though the word mediator, like a mediator, exists in Russian, that's not the word that's primarily used in the language of the legislation. The word that's used is посредник, which essentially means like a third party middleman that has a linguistic association in the Russian language as a thug, right? So that the word choice, if read by an average citizen, is going to have a flavor that is not intended. So that starts to point at the thoughtfulness of legislation for accessibility to the public. And in 2011, when this law was passed, there was no simultaneous marketing campaign or PR announcement. So the government also gets to sort of pat itself on the back that this has moved forward, and a lot of really important thinkers and professors who've pushed this forward and are admirable are also thrilled that the government received it, and then it stops there. So when you talk about it, a matter of trust, there's now a lag between when this became official and when the public is starting to learn about it, if they're even starting to learn about it. And that has inherent distrust because, well, this has been around now for a decade and it's been kept a secret. And so the rollout and the imperfect way that it has been rolled out might have some after consequences.
Thank you for that. Morike, let me turn to you, please, and your experience in Nigeria. Can you describe how mediation has evolved within your country?
Thank you, Bruce. I would say mediation is not alien to the African, as most people might know. Pre-colonial African societies normally resolve their disputes through negotiation, mediation, early neutral evaluation, and eventually through arbitration, which was usually through the king. If all of those steps, it was like a multi-tiered system. But formal mediation really came into Nigeria through the Lagos multi-door courthouse. Similar to what Tara had said, in Nigeria, we have a population of about 200, and about 20 million of those live in Lagos. And Lagos is such a small a state of about 3.5 square kilometers in size. And you can imagine that amount of people. So with that population, and Lagos is the commercial center, Lagos is the New York of the US. Even though Washington is your capital, we have Abuja as our government capital also. And so with all of that business, you have all the bank headquarters in Lagos. You can imagine the amount of disputes that will be in Lagos, and of course, how busy the dockets of the Lagos High Courts are compared to all the other states of the Federation. And so, same battling with not enough resources, the average length of time to try a case in the High Court in Lagos is actually about 10 to 15 years. Sometimes it can even be longer than that. It's only if you are really lucky that you probably do a 6-7 year. And so with that as a background, mediation was formally introduced through the Lagos Multi-Door Courthouse in 2002. And this was as a result of public-private partnership between a private group, and the Lagos High Court, because there was just the need to do something about the docket that was just too large, and there were no resources commensurate with trying to resolve those dockets. And so some really good, interesting pointer to that was that at the onset of the introduction of formal mediation through the courts, a particular case that had been in court for about 15 years and actually involved the former vice president of Nigeria, who used to fly down from the eastern part of Nigeria, was resolved in one day. And that really just gave a boost to the idea that mediation would work and could work, even though cases had already been in court. And that in itself was how formal mediation was introduced in Nigeria. And this started, as I said, in Lagos, but it has spread to all the other commercial centers, Port Harcourt, Kano, Abuja, the capital, Kaduna, Edo, and Enugu states. So about 16 of the states out of the 36 states now have a multi-door courthouse, but it's basically still the court-connected centers that are pushing mediation in Nigeria.
Thank you, Morenike. I have not been to Nigeria, but with our work in Zambia and Rwanda, and talked about how the rich tradition of dispute resolution historically in pre-colonial times, in your experience, has that helped lay a good foundation for developing a more modern mediation approach to disputes within Nigeria?
Definitely, I would say it has, just as I had explained earlier, because you can actually replicate what we had pre-colonial negotiation when two people will try and work with themselves, the mediation where they found a third-party clansman, and then early neutral evaluation where they couldn't settle with that third-party clansman, they found someone higher, probably the chief, to do that. And then when they then couldn't do that, couldn't resolve even with that adjudication, they now went to the king. And this happened in most of the three major clans, the Yorubas, the Hausas, and the Igbo. Those are the three major tribes in Nigeria. And this was a similar practice in all of those three regions or major tribes in Nigeria. So yes, I would say with that background, pre-colonial times, it just helped to move mediation, or for people to see mediation as a way to try and resolve this. And I think for most people, the fact that you then had the court, because you have mediation introduced through the court-connected centers, also then just gave like a formal support or benefit to what we were already used to pre-colonial times.
Thank you, Morenike, for that good introduction. I see our panel has been joined by our esteemed colleague, Alberto. Welcome. You'll need to take your microphone and put it on for us. I want to ask you a question. As you're getting set up to speak, I'll let you know that Tara gave an extraordinary welcome and introduction of your background and accomplishments, including your prowess as an accomplished golfer. So you've been introduced professionally and personally to the group today already. Let's talk, as you can hear from this prior conversation, we are trying to do just a very quick introduction to how mediation came about within various countries. Of course, you hail from Argentina and can speak to that experience. Will you give us just 2 or 3 minutes on how mediation has evolved to this point within Argentina?
Okay, thank you. I apologize for my delay, but we have had here a huge storm and a problem with internet, and I have to connect through an alternative router. That's why I'm apologizing. Okay, Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure for me being here. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tara, basically. They are suffering me with my different time zone. To make a long story short, we have mediation in Argentina more than 25 years. We have a mediation law, but it's a little bit complicated to explain because we have 24 provinces, like 24 states, okay? And in most of the 24 provinces talking about today, we have a mediation law, which is local, belongs only to this state or to this province. And we have a mediation law belonging to the nation that is only applied in the main capital, like Washington, D.C. Okay, the national law, the federal mediation law is only applied in the our Buenos Aires city, which is where we run the national law. All provinces has different regulation. Some of them are only for lawyers. Some of them, 2 of them are lawyers plus. Could be lawyer plus an accountant, lawyer plus psychologist, lawyer plus an architect. Lawyers should be part of those co-mediation system. Okay, in the province of Salta in the north and in the province of Córdoba in the center of our country, the law allows co-mediation, which is 1 lawyer plus 1 other player. In Buenos Aires city and in the province of Buenos Aires, it's a little bit complicated, but one is the main capital and the other one is the biggest province. You could run the mediation only if you are a lawyer. Okay, I'm talking about mediation previous to the trial, okay, because we have a very sophisticated name in order to describe mediation in the law, which is compulsory mediation pre-trial, to put in your words. Okay, in Spanish is mediación prejudicial, okay, mediation prejudicial perjury, compulsory, obligatoria. I'm always said if it is a mediation, couldn't be compulsory, but this was the way that the pioneers in the mediation in our country tried to, let's say, put the mediation in force. Okay, if you want to go to a trial, you first need the stamp that you went through mediation. You just could be in the session and say, I don't want to be here. Okay, you walk out. But if you don't have this stamp of you attend this this mediation session, you are not allowed to initiate any legal action. This is clear what I'm saying?
Understood.
I hope so. On the other hand, it was a huge movement in order to promote mediation in other areas than the courts, okay? Schools, organization of, for example, the CPA organization, the big one in Buenos Aires City, who has 70,000 members, participants. They have a mediation center, negotiation and mediation center for private cases, basically belonging to asset and liability issues, okay? Because they are CPAs plus a lawyer, which is the secretary of the center. And in this case, it's like a private mediation, okay? This is because of the when you sign your agreement. I don't remember now in English the word that we say. That you accept to go into the mediation issue prior to the trial, okay? Okay. And this is why in this center, which is like official but not the court, we have a lot of cases. We used to have 200 mediator registered being CPAs, okay? Certified public accountants, okay? We have a huge development run by my organization of the Latin America in community mediation. This is a public service from the government to the citizens. We started in year 2012 in the north of our country in Salta. We trained 70 community mediation centers belonging to the Minister of Justice. And we started in 2012 with co-mediation, one mediator in one city sitting with the party together, and the other mediator in the other city sitting with the other party together. And that was the way that we started the co-mediation online, in spite of course, the face-to-face mediation. And we run those programs in different provinces. And the last one year, 2017, in the main capital in Buenos Aires, we create the MEL. MEL means Mediación en Línea, online mediation program for belonging to the government of Buenos Aires. And this organization runs approximately 10,000 mediation per year. And at the beginning, 2017, 30% was online. Of course, now 100% is online, and they are doing approximately 1,000 mediation per month. Well, that's 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes, I think it's enough.
No, that's a good introduction, and we'll come to the online experience here shortly. I want to ask all of our panelists a question about the experience of some of the challenges that have been faced. And I'm going to combine a couple questions that I've hopefully prepared the panel to be thinking about, and ask both for each of you to contemplate and address a specific challenge that you confronted within your country to implementing mediation specifically, and what kind of strategy has been adopted to try and address that, whether successful or otherwise. But let's talk in terms of what those challenges have looked like from each of your perspectives. And I think what I'd like to do is start, Laura, with you on that question. And so give us a problem and give us a potential solution.
Sure. So there are, I highlighted earlier the challenge of distrust of government, and also, to expand on that, there's a distrust sometimes of concepts that seem to emanate from the West. And if there is an association with mediation being something that comes from the US, or that it's a kind of Western process, there's some distrust of that. But kind of grounding into the distrust of government, and it's sort of backtracking into the Soviet regime and distrust of those trained and emanating from the Soviet regime. One of the challenges, to be specific, is if you have, it's very different from what you would assume. So if you have a middle-aged or elderly individual who is sitting at a table and inviting somebody to mediation as a neutral, there's going to be immense distrust of the process, because that person, even though they seem, vetted and experienced, is going to be assumed to be a product and educated by a corrupt system. So one solution has actually been the training of younger mediators who are not the product of Soviet era education. And it's been really surprising. I had a conversation with a few Ombuds Office individuals from the UN, and they confirmed, my impression that in any aspect of mediation, again, it's all voluntary in Russia, in civil mediation. So whether it's family, whether it's commercial, whatever the case may be, parties actually seem to be surprisingly comfortable when they enter a room and see a young, recently trained, what we would think of as a novice, sitting at a table, because their impression is, oh, this person is probably not corrupt. So that has been an interesting solution of actually inviting kind of younger, recently trained mediators into these seemingly substantial, challenging mediation rooms and conversations where it seems counterintuitive given expertise, but the trust factor increases exponentially when there isn't this association of a previously jaded, potentially corrupt member of the legal society. So that has been an unexpected, I think, twist to solving that kind of cultural conceptual challenge.
I think counterintuitive is a great word, and it's a fascinating solution to a probably predictable problem. I know from our work in Tbilisi in the Republic of Georgia that there are those times where the sort of anti-Western sentiment does impede their ability to introduce new concepts and individuals particularly. So things to be considering, in the political environment. Thank you. Morike, how about in Nigeria? Give us an example of a challenge that you have faced or others around you have faced in implementing mediation in Nigeria, and some creative solution to address that challenge, please.
Okay. Nigeria is a country. We have 36 states. We have a federal system of law, and the only statute that we have in respect of alternative dispute resolution is Arbitration and Conciliation Act. It doesn't talk about mediation. It mentions conciliation is in passing, but the emphasis really is on arbitration. And so most people are very used and comfortable with arbitration awards and judgments because they see those as ways they can resolve their disputes and enforce those disputes. So a way around it, just as I had said earlier on, is that mediation was introduced through the multi-door courthouse. So what the different courthouses have done is to pass legislation through their high court rules, making mediated agreements enforceable. So that has made mediation, that has pulled mediation into the enforceable realm, like the court judgment or the arbitral award, which legislation actually supports. Even though currently there is a bill before the National Assembly trying to legislate federally for mediation. But what the different courthouses that have adopted mediation have done through their multi-door courthouse laws and the rules of court really is to ensure that mediated agreements can now be enforced through their court systems, just like you would enforce a court consent judgments. That has been a way around it, and this has helped because this has then given people who either would not agree to sit at a table to mediate. This has given them the impetus to actually want to sit because they know that they're not just sitting and wasting time, and that the other party is not going to adhere to the terms, but that these terms, if they're able to agree and put down in writing, can actually be enforced, just like what would happen if they had been in court for maybe 10, 15 years, and even better, because then you have what we call a consent judgment, which under Nigerian law is not appealable. If you still get a judgment on the merits from the High Court, we have the hierarchy, of course, so you can still then go from the High Court to the Court of Appeal and then to the Supreme Court, and then you can be there for the next 30 years. But if you have a mediated agreement, the beauty of that is that it's in the realm of what we call a consent judgment. And they're only limited, just like you have under the New York Convention, the limited grounds to set aside or not to seek or not to agree to enforce an arbitral award. You have limited grounds upon which you can actually seek to set aside a consent judgment. So that has actually helped to push mediation forward a bit.
So you would, to just highlight your comments, you would say institutional support for mediation, and particularly through the court system, and more specifically, even the enforcement of judgments has been helpful in sort of overcoming initial resistance, perhaps, and supporting the implementation generally.
Definitely.
Good, thank you. Alberto, back to you for a moment. Give us an example of a major challenge that you and your peers have faced in Argentina, moving the mediation forward, and what did you do about it?
Well, Honestly, we don't think that we have the problem that probably they are facing in other countries regarding mediation resistance, even though in the judges. The situation that we have been facing for the last year and now is to adapt legislation to the online mediation, because basically now Latin America and Argentina is very heavily hit by the pandemic, and we are short of vaccines. The situation that we have is nobody's going out. Most of the institutions, they are not working. People is even though the official servers are doing home office, then the traditional way of life that we had in the past, it doesn't exist today, and at least apparently for the full year. Basically, we have working because our experience with different provinces and Ministry of Justice and courts, helping them in order to adapt their local mediation law to online dispute resolution. And also in the way to interact with other provinces, because the problem is when you don't have a federal law, it's not easy to work among provinces, because it's like you are working through a border, which is like you live in another country, even though you are in your own country. That's why our main focus now is try to help mediators walking through the narrow door, which the narrow door is all of a sudden everybody has to be an online dispute resolution expert, because the only way to make some money. And we are talking about money when we are trying to help mediators in order to maintain their activity. And this is our main challenge now. And at the beginning was a huge wave. Everybody was trying to know what to do with the Zoom and mediation, disregarding confidentiality or Zoom bombing or whatever. Because when I begin with this 15 years ago, face-to-face mediator asking me confidentiality, security, etc., etc. All of a sudden, nobody take care about security. Just try to do a mediation online or with your WhatsApp or whatever. And now we are trying to adapt all those systems with the legislature and the Minister of Justice to organize this disorder in order to help mediators to maintain their activity. Because just, I will finish with this, most of the issues are stopped. It's because you have judiciary holidays, put it in place, and you suspend the actions, and everything is moving ahead. Then the only issues that are running now is training from the 8 in the morning until 10 in the night. Everybody's jumping in different millions and thousands of Zooms, trying to understand the life for a techno mediator, okay? But as Cuba Gooding Jr. says in Jerry Maguire, show me the money. And that's the problem that we are trying to help the mediator to get the ability and the capacity to make some money during this pandemic. And that's why last week we will have a huge ODR exportage in Latin America, and we have more than 1,000 paid participants. Because what today is a huge difference between having paid participants and free participants. That's more or less the situation that we are facing now, Bruce.
Thank you, Alberto. And it sounds like you've identified a couple of challenges, one being the sort of multifaceted or jurisdictional approach to mediation initially, and the need to then organize and harmonize through federal law a standardized approach to implementing mediation. And the second issue you identified, obviously, is the result of the pandemic. I think Jim Willamette described it best before your arrival, saying that the online capability we have developed and now all possess is nothing short of a miracle this past year. How we talk about training and using that to our best advantage we'll come to in just a few minutes. But thank you for those thoughts. Tara, how about you and India? Can you talk about perhaps a significant challenge that you and Lila and others in India have confronted and how you've tried to address it?
Oh yes, Bruce, the challenges have been plenty. And there are many that we have faced, but for the purpose of just now, I'm going to highlight on the one big challenge that I felt early on when we started our work in the space. So mediation in India, as I shared earlier, was largely introduced and managed through the court-annexed mediation programs. The mediation mandate came under the National Legal Services Authority, whose primary mandate is actually legal aid. So mediation came under the management of the National Legal Services Authority. Additionally, judges who are dealing with huge docket issues, caseload issues, were also given the mandate to lead mediation programs. So this heavy concentration of mediation being with the courts and with judges who have not only 300, 350 cases a day to deal with administration of courts issues, were also given the mandate to deal with mediation, plus the National Legal Services Authority. The way we have attempted to address that has actually been through the entry of private players into the market, bringing in a culture of taking dispute resolution outside the courts. So people can change their idea of you don't have to go to court in order to resolve their disputes. That coupled with the onset of ODR, especially with young innovators, where mediation, ODR came to be seen as innovation in the law and justice space. India has been priding herself on all the technological innovation that we have engaged in. But when it comes to law and justice, there's been absolutely no change in the past 70 years. And this has provided the mandate for innovation to take place. So this combination of private players coming in, rehauling the system, designing dispute resolution to be commercial friendly, to be quick, to be cost effective, younger innovators coming in, building technology, being able to showcase that. Right now we've been able to show for Lok Adalats, which is a form of dispute resolution in India, which is akin to conciliation done by a judge, a retired judge typically. How these processes could be done online, how e-commerce companies have been able to pilot dispute resolution using ODR methodologies, doing it online, payments, digital payments being resolved online. Organizations like ours, CAMP, where we are able to show that complex commercial disputes can also happen outside the courts, is what is beginning to influence the larger mindset that dispute resolution, which up until now could only happen in person in a court hall, could actually happen outside. So that, I would say, has been the big challenge that with especially over the past year with the pandemic, we've been able to kind of, the Holy Grail has come together for us to be able to show that we can make this change and take it outside the scope of the challenge that we were initially facing.
Thank you. And still focused on your comment that judges are trying to deal with, in some instances, 350 cases a day. If that doesn't present a fertile opportunity to discuss mediation and its help in access to justice, I don't know what does. But Tara, it seems like in the last year in particular, and whether we'll get to the online aspect of things in a few moments, but it seems like India is really gaining traction and momentum toward a more court-sponsored and even commercial practice in the mediation world. Is that your boots on the ground assessment as well?
Absolutely. And it goes to the tough reality that we have 40 million cases pending in our courts. And so we really don't have an option. But the other big change that has happened is also our ability to be able to have found those champion judges or those champion influencers. Morenike shared earlier how these practices are not uncommon to the African culture. It's not uncommon to the Indian culture as well. We've had the panchayat systems well before the British came in, and we had very robust mechanisms as part of our culture to deal with disputes in a collaborative manner. But unfortunately, close to 300 years of the adversarial court systems, a lot of these ideas we forgot. And today, when we have our influential judges, senior judges of the Supreme Court calling out and saying, this is an acceptable way to resolve disputes. We don't need to be hearing this in court. Or we have leading policy institutions that's part of the government calling out saying it's part of our mandate to be able to address 1 billion disputes online. When the influential voices have started speaking out loudly, it has also influenced the mindset of the average litigant that perhaps these are processes that we can and should be considering.
Thank you. Let's pause for a moment as a panel. What I'd like to do, Claire and Colin, is see if there have been any questions that have arisen regarding this issue of challenges and potential solutions that maybe our broader audience can help elicit.
Good question. So first, thank you, Jim, because Jim has been answering a lot of these questions very well. There's definitely a question of funding about who funds private versus government mediation efforts, which is the eternal debate.
Let's start there for a second and take that. Anybody on our panel want to address how the question of court funding versus private funding, commercial mediation issues have developed or taken shape within their countries?
Well, I can jump in here, Bruce.
Mm-hmm, please.
Because mediation has actually been court connected, it's really the state that has funded mediation. And what had happened at the onset is that most of the mediators actually did the work like pro bono as volunteer work. And even up till now, that has affected the growth of private mediation, because then most people just see mediation, most of the populace generally see mediation as something they do in the court. And then the private mediators, in trying to build their private practice, have a hard time putting a tag or a price to their work as mediators. So it's really more of the government, at least in Nigeria, that funds mediation. So, but you would have the trickle few commercial mediators that are able to get some work, probably because maybe one or two of the company executives have had a chance at the court referred mediation, and they had seen the benefit and the utility to it, and then they now embrace it. A few of the banks have, and a few of some of the international organizations also. So I think the funding really in Nigeria by the state has really not helped to develop the quote of private mediation.
Good. Anybody else? Alberto, you have a perspective?
Yeah, Bruce. Yeah, we have seen in Latin America for the last 3-4 years a lot of effort from the private sectors, and like an entrepreneurial issues, okay, just getting funding from some angels capital. The leading in this is Brazil, okay. In Latin America, Brazil has a lot of new potential startups regarding the ODR. One of them has get an initial investment of around $3 million for the beginning, which is quite important from an entrepreneurial approach. In Argentina, we have 2 startups being near, okay, just all of them are private fundings, okay, all of them, including in Mexico, coming from the, basically because When you talk about private sector, you are talking basically about technology merging with mediation, because there are no way to believe or to think in a business if you don't include ODR in a startup regarding this. We have a friend of us, friend of Colin also, Federico Ast, running a very interesting project. The name is Kleros, based on blockchain. And this is from the point of view of private sector. We will see soon a lot of startups regarding basically ODR. From the point of view of the government, we are working with the idea that today, different courts, different provinces, what are doing is, if you're a mediator registered in my court, you have to get your technology. Okay, your backpack is Zoom, WebEx, go to meeting, and if you want to do your job, you have to get your own conference room, which in fact is not the mediation service at all. From the beginning, with the file, with the signature at the end, with a synchronic issue in the middle. It's just a conference like the one that we are running now. But we are working in a project where the software should be inside the court, and they have to provide an access code to the mediators, because the problem is there is a responsibility in protecting the data of the citizen, and the responsibility to protect the data of the city should be under the jurisdiction of the court. No, the owner of Zoom has the data of the parties in the mediation, which is absolutely crazy. That's my point of view from the private sector and from the public sector. Okay.
Thank you. Our experience in the United States was interesting, because almost more than 30 years ago now, when I wrote the first business plan for our first private commercial mediation company, I built in the assumption that maybe within 5 to 10 years, the courts would be introduced to mediation and see its benefits and adopt it in some format, including offering some potentially free services. So that was an assumption we made. But at the time we began the whole movement toward mediation, it was purely from the standpoint of the commercial sector offering for-pay services. So a little different than in many countries. Laura, did you have any thoughts about how things have evolved in that regard in Russia?
Sure. So in the language of the mediation law in Russia, it's actually deliberately stated that it's the responsibility of parties to carry the cost of mediation themselves. There are a few pilot programs in Rostov and some other cities that have tried to subsidize that, just to encourage use. And those subsidies have been privately funded. So they do fundraising and get private sponsors of those concepts, but it's not government allotment or state allotment. So the assumption is that parties are paying, and then there are a few experiments with private funders in that arena.
Thank you. Claire, were there any other questions that still remain regarding the topics that we've addressed so far before I move on to what may be the more sort of fertile ground of sort of online issues? I think silence will be an answer. And all right, let's do this, because
no answer is an answer.
It's impossible to sort of talk about the global growth of mediation, obviously, particularly in the last 12 or 13 months, without addressing the kind of online component of things. So let's turn our group's attention to that topic. And Tara, perhaps I can start with you first this time with our last question, which is, where do you see the future of online mediation and online mediation training in the context of India's broader efforts to implementing a culture of mediation?
Short answer, it's here to stay. There's no denying, as all of us are seeing around the world, that the past year has pushed and propelled this movement forward like no other. And specifically in the Indian context, a couple of things that I want to share, which is dispute resolution up until March of 2020 was very much about going to court and having a hearing in a court hall with a judge. Courts shut in March, and there was no other choice but to digitize our courts. So that pried open the very concept of dispute resolution does not have to happen only in a court hall. And our litigant community, our legal community started experiencing dispute resolution, even if it was from the mandate of courts online. That in conjunction with the fact that this movement had been gaining momentum, especially over the past 5 years, with private players stepping in. And I think a point that Colin made in one of our webinars in India, which is, if you want immediate change or quick change, it has to happen with the private sector. So technology and being able to keep up with respect to reach, with respect to scale, can only happen with technology, and that is in the private domain. So our ecosystem had kind of set themselves up with private players who had entered the market with respect to a range of services in the mediation space, whether it was the low value, high volume kinds of cases, or the more complex commercial cases that an organization like ours has been focusing on. With that being set up and technology openness that our litigant community and our legal community were forced to reckon with, has created today this momentum for online mediation moving at a pace that we haven't seen before. Do we have a long way to go? Yes, we do. We're at the start of our journey, but it's so encouraging to see mediations on the online space coming in from various sectors, whether it's the Supreme Court referring out complex cases, whether it is parties seeking mediation before they go in for arbitration, whether it is, as I mentioned earlier, e-commerce companies running pilot programs to be able to see that dispute resolution is happening in 45 days as opposed to 3 years, whether it's digital payment companies and banks being able to show that through, again, these pilots, that loan recoveries are happening and customers are kept happier like never before, or more traditional systems like lok adalats happening online and being able to reach numbers and reach people like they've not been able to do in person. So all of this has come together for us to be certain that this is the future for dispute resolution in India. When it comes to training, Bruce, again, CAMP has worked with EMA, and we have seen how our ability to reach diverse groups. I mean, remember India, each state is a nation in itself. We speak different languages. We have our own unique culture. There's rural, there's urban, there's remote. I mean, it's such a diverse landscape. Our ability to address the reach and the diverse needs of our country is only possible if we go online. And the one thing that India has been able to do quite effectively in the recent past is to bring our country online. So with this access to technology, with most of our population, not most, large numbers of our population, we still have huge access issues, but at least when it comes to, or digital access issues, but at least when it comes to urban India, large parts of our people are online. Our ability to reach them, whether it's for community mediation initiatives, and we're seeing initiatives like this where we're trying to build the social muscle, where we can change the mindset and the approach and thought process when it comes to conflict. Our ability to be able to reach our community is enhanced hugely by online training.
You've offered a lot of insightful thoughts about India, past and present. I'm reminded of the sort of juxtaposition between what I would perceive, with no offense intended, to be sort of historical inefficiencies versus the promise of online dispute resolution. And I'm reminded of being in Supreme Court. Anybody else hearing back? A little bit of feedback. There we go. I'm reminded of being in the Supreme Court judicial chambers in Delhi and seeing stacks floor to ceiling of paper. You talk about 40 million cases backlogged. And now you juxtapose that with the experience over the last year of online dispute resolution. And you and I did a panel with one of the leading mediators in India, Shriram Panchu, who flat out told us he's never going back to face-to-face mediation. And sort of what goes into that thought process is interesting to contemplate. But the whole sense of India, and so many of its just younger population particularly, being tech savvy and entrepreneurial, speaks volumes to the potential of technology and online dispute resolution processes in particular. So thank you for kind of sharing some of that.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah. Monique, how about in Nigeria? Where do you see the promise and potential of online modalities?
Well, the digital divide, we have most of the people. Hello, hear me? Hello.
Marie,
hear me?
we can hear you, although you're a little bit broken up, but keep trying and we'll see if we can get a clear connection. I think, Monique, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Let's see if time heals this particular wound. Alberto, how about in Argentina and the Argentinian perspective? You've touched on it briefly in some of your answers, but where do you see the promise and potential of online technology?
Okay, we had living a cannibalization process, okay? The online mediation is eating very quickly the face-to-face mediation. Even though when the pandemic, I hope one day finishes, I'm assume that perhaps we will return just 20 or 30%. We will go into a hybrid model with more participation of the online meetings, online action, online activities. Last year, we trained 3,000 mediators in order to give them the possibility to be online mediator or cyber mediators. We create for free a global registry of cyber mediators. All of the mediators trained under our programs go for free into this web page, which is cybermediators.com, and they have the possibility to be fined for someone from the civil society looking for a mediator in another country. Let's say it was a way to put at front those mediators who has the capability from the technical point of view, from the protocol of handling emotion in virtual environments, to provide the service reasonably, taking into account the situation. And that works very, very well. Everybody wants to be in this registry. And this stopped the situation that I received a lot of phone calls from different countries looking for a mediator in a Latin American country. Alberto, you know someone in Mexico, you know someone in Chile, you know someone in Brazil? Okay, here, boys, you have. This is the list that the mediator that has the possibility to do this. And this is the way to put them in the windows, okay? Just in the view of the public from here, up around the world. And they have their profile there, which their expertise could be civil, business, family, whatever. And they have the possibility to get direct contact from the potential customers. We don't have, there are no intermediation from all the Latin America and the cyber registers. That is a direct a direct contact. that was, let's say, what we did in the past in order to push the online services. And now, basically, we're training public sector, okay? Now we have a lot of requests from Minister of Justice on mediation, huge mediation areas, requesting the training of their own personnel, okay? Because they understand that they have to have a different approach, idea of what is blockchain, artificial intelligence, smart contract, algorithm, well, all the new, let's say, we are working in a new glossary. Also, I'm the director of a postgraduate program in online dispute resolution in our university. My university is a public university. And this program lasts 1 year, and they have all, let's say, all the process from just integration and labeling in technology until let's say the simulation, the real simulation and the role plays, going through worldwide legislation, social networks, present, past, and future of ODR. Well, that's what we are doing. We have a very important network in the region and Spain, and we develop alliances with local partners. We have running now ODR Peru, ODR in Brazil, ODR in Mexico, ODR Ecuador, and ODR Spain. All of those ODR actions are partners of ODR Latin America, which is our organization.
It's a great story, one of initial success and sort of depth of penetration into a variety of countries and potential markets, and the promise of the online technology sounds like you are well on top of. So thank you. Monique, let me try you again and see if we have a little better success this time.
Okay, I think this should be better now.
Good. Yes, you sound good. So keep going, please.
Okay. Well, ours is not a story as lovely as Tara's India, Nigeria, and well, some other parts of Africa. Kenya is actually a bit better. And we have a few entrepreneurs in Kenya trying to actually develop ODR applications, particularly for dispute resolution. What most people have been doing in Nigeria in the last year is really just to get onto Zoom. We, with Mediate.com, have actually tried to do some training across Africa, Ghana, and a few other places. But by and large, it's really, it's a new concept, and people are still trying to get a grasp of ODR and all of the ODR systems that are available. But most people are just very comfortable when they talk about ODR. All they think about is, well, once I get on Zoom and I have my mediations done, that's as far as they go. But with a little bit more awareness and education, I think, well, we will be able to take the step forward and take the initiative from India to move ODR in Africa.
Thank you. You and I have started this conversation, but our Mediation Academy efforts in Rwanda, just to give an example, I think we've trained about 20% of the Bar Association in Rwanda on mediation and mediation advocacy. And we've now trained almost 50% of the judges from the Minister of Justice down to court registrars in the process. While some of that's been in person, it's largely been online. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Laura, how about the Russian experience? What do you see the promise and potential for online technology being as it's applied in the Russian context?
So it actually seems to me that ODR is more promising than in-person mediation once was. So because of the 2017 digital economic programs that were accepted by the federal government, there's actually room in those regulations for ODR. So as there's economic development happening online and regulations falling in line with that, there will be dispute resolution online inevitably. And the government and broader cultures seem more warm and more receptive to that. So mediation itself as a process strategy might be, it seems to me, might become more popular in a backwards way, where ODR is pushed forward first, and then the process is identified and realized afterwards. In terms of online training, training is something that is very welcome in the Russian community. Russian professionals love being credentialed. They very much value certification and training opportunities. So if there are online training programs, whether it's about being an expert in how to do this online or an expert in online international elements, this is a culture that responds to paperwork, to certification, and to credentialed professionals. So they are primed for that. To me, it seems that the future of ODR now, and in light of the economy moving online, is more promising than the initial mediation movement was. So this is going to push all of these approaches to conflict resolution forward, in my mind, much more rapidly than the past decade may have witnessed, because of the new platform and the availability. There will, of course, be some challenges to consider with access to technology, the funding of access to technology in more remote areas than the cities that have typical access. But it seems that there's more interest in resolving those challenges than the pre-existing ones. So I think that the future of ODR is quite bright in Russia.
Thank you. You also make a number of good points. I don't have a lot of experience in Russia, but certainly in Bulgaria and Ukraine and neighboring countries, there is a strong appetite for mediation training and credentialing, and just a real hunger for sort of new ways. I'm intrigued by your comments, Laura, about the sort of almost upside down approach to bringing mediation in through online technologies, through younger generation, as you've talked about earlier today, and the promise really of expanding mediation through that demographic and through that technology to a sort of newer audience. And this goes to your initial observation about how mediation hasn't yet found its roots in broader society. But do you think that this a combination of technology-driven online dispute resolution techniques and the trust issue that you commented on earlier holds promise for expanding the reach of online dispute resolution within Russia?
I very much think that it does. Once more of life transitions online, including dispute resolution, it starts to normalize the idea of not walking into a courthouse. So what was just an assumed way of handling things where, oh, I have an issue, I have to go to court if it's a legal issue, you're no longer walking into that building on a kind of, subconscious level. You're already doing it differently. So the process might as well differ. There's more open-mindedness to that because it's already something new. You're already online, so it will look different. And then maybe there's a mediator sitting there online, and that's just part of this new difference. The trust element is really going to, in my opinion, hang on the mechanisms. So if you're using Zoom, if you're using certain platforms, trust in confidentiality is going to be key. So for example, some of the ODR platforms that are currently in place are a system that emanates, a software system that emanates from the Russian Chamber of Commerce. For those who are skeptical about government entities, they don't necessarily feel the level of privacy that they would sitting in a private room. So ensuring some of the confidentiality parameters in the platform selection and having trust in that will be key. But again, people are more open to doing things online, knowing that doing things online looks different, and inherently mediation has some space to show up in those settings.
Thank you. Let me open it up a little bit here. Colin, Claire, are there questions that have emerged from the audience as they've listened to this discussion morph in the direction of online mediation and training? Okay. I think I can, and don't hesitate to jump in, Claire or Colin, if a question does arise. I want to make a couple observations. Certainly, to echo a lot of Jim's comments at the outset, this last year, of course, has been transcendent for all of us. As it relates to online mediation, I've been mediating almost every day since my office manager came in the middle of a 2-day mediation last March 16th, 2020, and said, we're shutting down the office. Had to flip the switch overnight and go home and look at YouTube, figure out what Zoom was and how to make it work for us. And since then, it's been kind of an everyday experience. And where we strike the balance as we go back to quote unquote business as usual, because I don't think we ever will. I wrote a blog about this last October for our Mediation Academy. Virtual mediation, an enhanced process, or an ephemeral solution, and mostly just trying to vet the dialogue about those considerations that will hopefully be part of a thoughtful process as we decide how we move forward. And everybody's going to draw those lines differently. The pendulum is probably going to swing back and forth a bit as we figure out what are those techniques that are here to stay and will in fact enhance the process versus those opportunities where face-to-face dispute resolution still makes sense for all the reasons that drove us to this profession in the first instance. And that's a rich dialogue that I think will carry forward, not just throughout the conference that mediate.com has put forward, but in a lot of our professional lives. So I really view this as just a stepping stone to a broader conversation, and one that's going to be evolving over time. But truly, none of us are turning back the clock, and I think it has forced us all to really be introduced to the technology that for so many and for so long was an impediment to us being able to make transformative changes in our professional lives. And frankly, not getting up at 4:30 in the morning to get on an airplane to fly somewhere to mediate in person does have its advantages. So I haven't overlooked that. Questions to the audience, from the audience to our panel about the sort of online dispute resolution process, the mediation process itself, training aspects of things. I'll make one more observation about the training piece, because as Tara was so kind to introduce at the beginning, my wife Susan and I have had some experience in this area. And I think, the goal has always been, I think Laura touched on this as well, to basically kind of stand on the shoulders of our collective historic experience and ramp up the timeline for introducing quality training and education around the world. And the technology has allowed us and will continue to allow us to transcend borders in those efforts. And so trying to make that available, obviously, is the goal. The question is how you go about doing it. I still harbor the notion that online training and education is not a complete substitute for quality skill development. It certainly supports it and provides the necessary knowledge and foundation for good skill development. I think as we evolve in the online world of training, as Jim was talking about this morning, we are learning about modalities that assist us in skill development as well online. People who are videotaping on their iPhones their opening statements and sending it to us for review and comment. People who are filming private sessions, as Jim discussed, and then having us provide coaching moments and observations. All of those things are technologically driven and moments that we probably couldn't have envisioned a year or two ago. But I do think it's important to keep in mind with regard to the online training that what we're trying to do is provide the sort of structure and human connection that's required to complete people's experience in that training environment. And it starts with designing courses with online learning consultants to make sure that we're offering the best product. It continues with the sort of convening and intensive orientation and technology hand-holding for many around the globe that is required throughout the training itself. And ultimately, we have found that using local leaders, facilitators, who are as experienced in mediation as possible, to lead groups to reflective conversations about the online learning helps provide that necessary structure and support to keep people moving forward. And finally, I spent a lot of my days starting at 6 or 7 a.m. doing 90-minute webinars around the world where you parachute into a particular course and meet and greet a group that's only seen you online and answer questions and support the learning in ways that sort of ramp up the human connection. And the combination of in-person FaceTime and online technology, we all try and hit the sweet spot with various groups, and how and where that sweet spot exists is sort of an evolving conversation. But I'll just leave with the thought that it's a tremendous opportunity to reach people and places in the world that were never accessible, and at the same time to provide the platform of initial learning on which people can build their skill sets that hopefully, as we've said throughout the last hour and a half, ramps up that learning curve for everybody in every different part of the world. So I'll pause there. Questions for me or the group before I turn things back over to our host at this point? Okay.
Just very quickly, Maria was hoping for some more information from Alberto about your ODR, the ODR system that you mentioned.
Perfect.
So Alberto, if you can
turn your microphone on. No, can't hear. There we go.
It's the usual trick, okay? You seem that you are talking, but you are muted. Well, we are launching next week a very low-cost platform with a full service. The name is TODRA, Total Online Dispute Resolution Application. Will cost. We will have a free access for, I don't remember now, I think 8 hours per month. Then we'll have a medium access and a full access, and they will give the mediator a full process from the files through the electronic signature, included the, let's say, webinar or face-to-face action with notification and calendar. And that's all. Nothing new under the sun. It's just a full service where we focus in a low cost. Let's say, well, our strategy is tell the mediator why you have to use Zoom for $15.99 per month. Use this full system for $14.99 per month. That's the idea of what we are. It's a very simple issue. Just let's say that like the case load management up front that James has for a long time, including the calendar notification. And also we include, I'm sorry, because could be used also for lawyers, we include a payment system from a company called Mercado Pago, which is like a big one. Okay, then the mediator, if he has the possibility to collect money for, let's say, a previous consultancy or something like that, has an option to collect money from one of the parties at the beginning.
Thank you. Alberto, I'm sorry, Maria?
Yeah, could you write down in the chat?
No, 1-4.
I'm going to make a suggestion. I'm going to make a suggestion because I'm going to volunteer all of our panel members to be available to follow up on the internet with questions that people might have to address to them. And if our panel would be so kind as to reach out and respond to any questions following today's program, I think that would be just a delightful way to end. And thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Monique.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to talk about this. I apologize.
No. You were asked a question. I appreciate you responding. So I look forward to you continuing your conversation with her and providing what helpful information will be available. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate all the insight and conversation. As Jim pointed out earlier, it's just a great way to begin a deeper conversation. I think you've stimulated a lot of thinking, and we've raised a lot of important questions today. So Jim, I'm going to turn things back over to you and thank you for the opportunity from all of our perspectives to participate this morning.
Well, thank you, Bruce and Tara and panelists. This is really such an exciting experience just to connect all around the globe and share ideas. And as luck would have it, I have a construction project taking place right above me now, just to remind us that it's not all going to be smooth sailing with this online mediation. But I do want to officially welcome everybody to the online mediation revolution. We're now officially all co-conspirators, if you will, in creating respectful dialogue and the opportunity for optimized solutions globally. And the one thing I have found over the years, I have the hardest time getting my head around is the pace of change, not just change, but the pace of change. And I would like to offer to you that it is steadily accelerating, particularly in the space we're talking about, which is technology, problem solving, creating a resolution. And thinking back to day one of mediation, I've always asked myself, who are our competitors in the marketplace? And essentially, they're courts, and how much do people love going to court? And there's lack of resolution or lack of attention. Those are the main competitors. A legal process or lack of resolution are the leading competitors to capable dialogue and problem solving. And I just hope, and I think we do, that's why we're on this call, we appreciate that we truly have a massive opportunity now to grow and expand capable problem-solving discussions, mediative problem-solving discussions, and that the shifts in access, in convenience, in affordability are unprecedented. And we also probably want to remember that even if we can't offer Rolls-Royce mediation services, some measure of mediation is better than no mediation. And so with access, convenience, affordability, it may not be it's 4 or 8 hours. It might just be an hour or a half hour, but that half hour or hour could change people's lives. And as we say, well, where is all this movement and change going to come from? The courts are one place, but they play catch up, to be honest with you. And they're playing catch up real fast right now. Colin, you could speak to this very well. But I don't think they're the ones on the innovative, creative, optimizing edge. I think that is going to come from for-profit initiatives and non-for-profit initiatives. And that in addition to all the other issues, that we as a field need to also ask, how are we organized? Are we best organized within our countries globally to in fact embrace this moment? I call it a mediation renaissance, that we're dramatically cutting the costs of access to valuable services, making them so much more convenient. And, you know, in terms of who should do that, the answer is clearly all of the above. But I don't think we want to rely on the courts for doing the innovative work. They're mostly looking to manage their dockets, to be honest. And so in terms of how this stuff can best be done, I think that's going to be left to the rest of us to figure out. Colin, any final words, or Claire from you?
No, this is an incredible forum, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the series. Thank you, everyone.
So we will be in touch. We'll, over the next 5 weeks, we have 4 additional forums. Whether you signed up for specific forums or not, you'll get a note that will give you the URL access. And I'm sorry about the change in URLs for this meeting. There also is a feedback form that we put at this forum webpage, and I'll be including the link to the feedback form in an email that will go out to you most likely on Monday. And I just want to thank you. These discussions are exactly what we need to do. We need to really appreciate what a unique generational or more opportunity we have here to bring mediation to the world. And it's going to happen online. It's not going to happen in the physical brick and mortar world. So thank you so much for engaging. I trust you can find myself, Colin, and Claire, as well as Bruce and Tara online. Any questions, concerns, let us know. Otherwise, we'll be getting a note out to you on Monday. Thank you so very much for taking part.